Hey everyone, Digital Scriptorium here, and today I want to show off how to install NixOS 25.05 step by step from start to finish. I'll be choosing the GNOME desktop environment in this guide today. This guide is intended as a general use case installation of the operating system. I'm going to show off the system requirements, how to create the bootable media, installing the operating system, and then giving a general rundown of the operating system itself. I won't be going into specific application usage as that is outside of the scope of the guide today. All of the links I show off I will include in the description below so you can easily find them if need be. One disclaimer I just want to mention is a warning that this is an operating install guide where I completely remove the previous operating system. As is with any operating system, you might run into unforeseen issues. So you have to go into this with an open mind that issues might spring up. Worst case, you can always attempt to install a different operating system back on the machine. If you do need help, I have many different Windows and Linux guides to accomplish this on my channel. Before I begin, I also just want to mention that if you're feeling generous to think about donating to support my channel on either Ko-Fi or Patreon. Every bit goes right back into making new guides. Alright, with that all said, let's dive in. For the system requirements, I haven't been able to find a definite page that goes over this information. So I'm going to mention my own recommendations. You'll want a dual-core CPU, 4 GB of RAM as a minimum, but 8 GB or more is the much better option in my opinion. 60 GB of hard drive space, and I would recommend a solid-state drive so things are peppier, but a mechanical drive would still suffice. Lastly, a monitor that can do 1280 by 768 resolution or better, which should be easy to come by these days. Now let's get into downloading the NixOS ISO image. Alright, so let's download the latest version of NixOS. In this case, 25.05 was just released. So we'll just click on the download button right here. And then if we scroll down and locate the NixOS, the Linux distribution, then you're going to have a few options as you can see here. So all in all, you have 4 different options to choose from. You're going to have the graphical ISO image at the top, and then there's the minimal ISO image at the bottom. So the graphical one means that it actually has a desktop environment loaded onto it, and then the minimal one means that it's just a text user interface terminal sort of experience that you would have on, say, a server of some kind or something of that sort. One thing to mention, and it does mention it in the information on this page here, is that if you are going with the graphical ISO image, which is what we're going to use in this video, then you don't actually choose like the GNOME or KDE variant of the ISO image. You do that during the installation process. So as long as you download one of these graphical ISO images, then you're good for the different desktop environments that are bundled in with it, and then, like I said, you choose during the installation process. So for the scope of this video, just choose either the Intel or AMD or the ARM-based one. So in my case, I'm going to choose the Intel and AMD variant. Click on that. So while that finishes downloading, let's download the utility that we're going to use to create the USB boot media. So we're going to use a tool called Rufus. If you've seen any of my other previous videos, I use Rufus pretty frequently, not in all the videos, but generally most of them. Anyhow, on Rufus's website, we can scroll down to about midway, and there's the download section. Now, one of the reasons as to why I mainly choose Rufus is because it's incredibly lightweight. You don't have to install anything, and it doesn't require any prerequisite applications to be side-loaded for it to function, like Visual C++ redistributables and stuff like that. So the biggest thing is choosing which one is right for you. Most users are going to choose the top option, which is the standard Windows x64 variant. There is a portable version, which I still have not found a use for because of just how small the basic standard version is. There is a 32-bit version, aka x86 variant, and then there's also a Windows on ARM version if you have one of those machines. For today, I'm going to just click on Rufus. If you get a pop-up, just click the X, and then let's click on the Show in Folder option, and then we can close out of the web browser because we don't need that anymore. So at this point, let's plug in our USB thumb drive. My recommendation is to have an 8 GB thumb drive if you don't have an 8 GB thumb drive or larger. If you don't have a thumb drive on hand, you could also technically burn this to a DVD. However, It's just going to be easier if you've got a thumb drive this day and age. If you don't have a burnable DVD or a thumb drive on hand, I will have a link in the description below for an inexpensive but name brand thumb drive, which will get the job done. So anyhow, I'm going to plug my thumb drive in and then we will continue the process here. Alright, with the thumb drive plugged in, I'm going to do one little routine that I've been showing off a lot in my Linux guides, and that is, if you're on Windows 10 or Windows 11, Windows Defender has the unfortunate habit of flagging Linux operating system files as false positives. So what ends up happening is as the data is being loaded onto the thumb drive, then Windows Defender comes in and pac-mans the files as they're moving along onto the thumb drive. A lot of times you don't even realize it until you go to try to install the operating system, and then you run into these really wacky errors and whatnot, and then you're scratching your head what went wrong. So let me show you how to temporarily turn off real-time protection, keyword temporarily. So if this machine is not the machine you're going to nuke, it's doing no harm to it, the real-time protection will turn back on in, I believe, 15 minutes, or if you reboot the machine. So let me show you that right now. And like I said, the steps for this are the same between Windows 10 and Windows 11. So first up, if you click on Start, and then do a search for Security, and then click on Windows Security, select Virus and Threat Protection, locate the Virus and Threat Protection settings and click on Manage Settings. And then here is the Real-Time Protection toggle. So toggle this off, you'll get the UAC prompt, select yes for that, and you may get a little balloon pop up that basically says, hey, just to let you know, real-time protection's turned off. We can just click out of that and close out of this. You will notice that the shield icon, at least for Windows 11, has the X in it, which just means that it is noticing that something's changed. So next up, let's double click on Rufus, select yes for the UAC prompt, and if all goes well, it should hopefully see that you have a thumb drive being detected. If your thumb drive is not being detected, then I would recommend just pulling the thumb drive and reseating it, aka plugging it back in. See if it will recognize it then. If it doesn't, my other recommendation is leave the thumb drive in and reboot your machine, and then try to fire up Rufus, and of course make sure to temporarily turn off your real-time protection again. But if that does not make the thumb drive show up here, then the other option is, if you go to this PC, or you can go to File Explorer down here and search for it as well, but find the thumb drive, right click on it, select Format, and one thing just to mention is that if there's any data on the thumb drive, just make sure that you back it up if you need it. Otherwise, it's going to just outright nuke everything on that thumb drive. So we can leave whatever the default name is for it, and then just do Start, click OK for the warning saying it's destroying everything on the drive, data-wise that is. Click OK, close out of this, and then you can close out of that. And then if it still doesn't detect it after the format, close out of Rufus, go back in, and then hopefully it will detect it for you. Worst case, also, if you've got multiple thumb drives, try the different thumb drives. So anyhow, thumb drive is detected. Let's click on the select button and then locate wherever you downloaded the NixOS. So I have it in my downloads folder. I'll click open, and then I'm going to leave everything as is here. We're leaving it all entirely up to Rufus to give us the recommendation for this ISO file. So let's click on Start, and once again, before actually I click on Start, just make sure if there is any data on the thumb drive, back it up before you continue on, because it is going to get nuked as it moves all this data over and formats it. So let's click on Start, and then it's going to mention that it's an ISO hybrid image detected. We're just going to leave the recommended setting for Rufus, click on OK, and then you may see this where it says another program or process is accessing the drive. If you do, just click yes, and that's going to warn you that the drive is going to be formatted and the data is going to be destroyed. Just click OK as long as you're okay with that. And then at this point, let's just be patient as it loads everything on the thumb drive, and we'll continue on. Alright, if all goes well, we should see a ready state here. If for some reason you get any errors, I would recommend just trying it again. If you still get errors, then it may be worth trying a different thumb drive. And again, if you also get errors, then make sure that real-time protection is still turned off temporarily. So anyhow, in my case, everything looks happy. So we'll click close, and then we'll close out of this. So now the biggest difficulty is actually going to be getting your computer to actually boot off of the thumb drive. Now, unfortunately, every make and model is different into how you can actually get it to boot in regards to the special key that's going to be needed to mash as the machine is starting up. So my recommendation is just Google your make and model and figure out what key it is you need to press or mash while the machine is starting up. So in my case, my machine is F12, so that's what I know. So I'll mash that as soon as I start the machine up, and then we'll get into the whole installation process. So I'm going to mash my special F12 key, at least for my machine right here. And then you should see something somewhat similar to this. Every make and model is always different with how fancy they make the screen and what have you. But the key thing is, if I down arrow here, that you would see something along the lines of USB HDD, aka USB hard disk drive, or it may say USB thumb drive, or it may even say USB virtual CD drive. Another factor is also just looking into the model of the thumb drive it is that you've got, and that usually shows up here. So anyhow, this is my thumb drive, so I'm going to hit enter, and then I'm just going to use the up down arrow keys just to bump it so that the little timer does not continue going down on us here. However, I just want to show that there are several options to choose from on the main page. So you really have the two big desktop environment options that you can choose. So there's the GNOME options at the top, so you've got two of those, and you've got two KDE Plasma options that you can choose. Now, in regards to which is which, basically you've got the Linux long-term support version for both, and then you also have the latest variant that has been released for NixOS as another option. My recommendation is to stick with the long-term support version and not choose the latest and greatest, mainly for stability purposes. The other thing is that there are more options that you can choose from. For instance, Firmware Setup will attempt to get your machine into the BIOS, and then there's some other options here that I'm not going to dive into, but you can certainly feel free to research. So for the sake of this video, I'm going to choose the installer for GNOME. You can actually choose the installer for any of these, but then during the installation process, it actually will still ask you which desktop environment you actually want to install. So anyhow, I'm just going to choose the top one, we'll hit enter, and then just be patient as it loads it all into memory. And then we should see the fancy little icon, and it's attempting to load everything in, so just be patient. So by default, it actually loads us into the live CD or live environment, whichever you want to call it. And that basically means that you can actually try out the operating system without actually installing it on your machine. The downside to it is that any configuration changes you make or anything you download on here or install, it's not going to persist through reboots. So you reboot the machine and all that's just going to get nuked. So you can also potentially get some performance hits too, as it's not actually loaded onto your machine, but it's all being pulled from the thumb drive and whatever's loaded into your system memory. However, since we're going to install it, let's go ahead and just click into here in case it's not already kind of maximized into the NixOS installer. The very first thing you're going to be met with is choosing your language. And the odd thing, at least that I see with mine, is that when you click on this little drop down, it actually quickly opens and closes. So what you have to do is you actually have to left click, and then you can move around and select your language as you're still holding the left click button. So in my case, I'm just going to leave mine as American English, but feel free to choose whichever is best suited for you, and then click on next. Next up is going to be the time zone section. So you can click on the map and it will set your time zone, or you can also use these drop downs. There's also some options to where you can choose for these settings if you wanted to. However, my time zone looks perfectly fine for me, so I'm going to click on next. So next up is going to be the keyboard configuration that you can set. So you can choose keyboard models, you can look for languages for them. And then there's this tiny little search little box kind of thing down here, which you can actually type in to see how the keyboard is typing out and if those keys are actually proper. And then there is also another section in the switch keyboards section that you can switch up keys and whatnot. And the key thing again here is that if it's a drop down, make sure you hold the left select button. If you accidentally choose something that you don't want in here and you're trying to blank it back out, at least for me, I've only been able to figure out a way of blanking it out by actually hitting cancel and then select the install system option again right here, and that will start the process all over again. So that's kind of what I found in case you get stuck in a limbo state like I did previously. Anyhow, this all looks good to me, so I'm going to click on next. So let's type in the name and all that good stuff here. So let's type in my name, and then what name do you want to use to log in? I'm just going to set that to digital. You can of course feel free to change this to whatever you want. So next up is going to be choosing the password for your named account, and then we'll choose the password for the administrator account. Now, one thing just to mention is by default it has the require strong passwords checked. So if you don't actually create a strong password in either of these, then it will not actually allow you to click next. My recommendation is leave the require strong passwords on and then type in, as it says, a strong password for both of these areas. There is also the option to log in automatically without asking for a password, and then there is also the option to use the same password for your administrator account. I'm going to leave both of these off. However, you can do whatever you want, but this is just my guidance. So I'm going to type in a password for my named account and a password for my administrator account, which are both different. So if all goes well, we should have the green check marks here. That is, of course, if the require strong passwords is still set for you. If you don't have this checked, then it basically willingly accepts anything, even if it's an incredibly weak password. Anyhow, everything's happy here. Let's click on next. So just as I'd mentioned earlier, even though we had selected the GNOME desktop for the installer or the option of the Plasma desktop, there's actually a whole bunch of different options that you can choose in this portion, and you can even select no desktop if you really wanted to, which makes it the light version or minimal version. So at least for this guide, I'm going to leave GNOME on here, but you can feel free to select any one of these desktop options. You can always click on them and it actually gives a neat little preview of what those different desktop environments actually look like. So there's different options that you can choose. Anyhow, GNOME is what I'm going to use, so I'm going to click on next. Next up is going to be the unfree software option. So this basically means that by default, and as they mention here, that by default everything that is currently on here is open source. However, there is the option to choose the unfree software, which is not open source, and a lot of it is stuff that you might need for instance, NVIDIA GPUs or some Wi-Fi chipsets may require this. My recommendation is to just check this to allow it so that your experience is, in my opinion, the most stable, at least hardware driver wise, and you also get the best options for video codecs and all that good stuff. So we'll click on next. So you're going to have a number of different options for the partitions portion. There is technically the option to install alongside another operating system. So if you wanted to dual boot, you could choose this option. For the sake of this video, I'm not going to dual boot. I'm just going to erase the disk, and NixOS will be the only operating system on the disk. At some point, I may make a video in the future that goes over how to dual boot a machine with a single hard drive and 2 hard drives. So anyhow, scope of this video, erase disk, and then I'm just going to scroll down so we can see this option. So there's a no swap option. Now, this is where it gets a little interesting because you need to choose swap no hibernate or swap with hibernate. If you've got a laptop, you may want to have swap with hibernate, or if you've got a desktop, you may want swap without hibernate. I've got a desktop, so I'm going to choose swap with no hibernate. You could still choose this if you have a laptop and you're not really caring about hibernation at all. So anyhow, I'm just going to choose that for this desktop. Once again, you can choose whichever you prefer. Some people may choose none. However, I still feel where swap is going to come in handy. Even if you have lots and lots of system RAM, I still feel swap is going to give you some performance improvements for things. There's also the option to encrypt the system if you wanted to. I'm not going to encrypt the system, but you can feel free to if you want. And then basically down below, it just gives a rundown of what is going to show up here. So I'm going to select next. And if your machine is like mine and it's not fully displaying everything, just hit the maximize button up top, and then it should show you the options to choose. So this is just a summary screen of what is being set. If everything here looks good, and you can also feel free to scroll up and down. But anyhow, if everything looks good here, then you can click on install. Otherwise, you could click on the specific configuration on the left, go back, change it, make it how you want it to look. And one thing I just want to mention before I actually click install, and I meant to say this earlier, is in the top right hand corner, there's the little network icon. If you click on that, it does give you options for hardwired or Wi-Fi connections. I do recommend that you have this connected to some kind of internet, whether it's hardwired, which is the preferred, or Wi-Fi, so that you can get internet connectivity, which will pull down potential updates and things that it may need along the way. So just an FYI, make sure to connect to internet if possible. So anyhow, let's click on install, and then let's just be patient as it works its magic. And one thing to mention is that if you're a little bored staring at the screen, you can click the toggle log button, which will show you exactly what's happening. And then you can also just click it again and it will get rid of toggle log. But anyhow, just be patient as this works its magic, and we will continue on once we're done. Now, if all goes well, we should see the all done screen. If you do hit any errors along the way, first thing you can do is just reboot your machine and try the process again. If it still fails, sometimes I found that the installers get angry at specific thumb drives. So if you've got spare thumb drives on hand, try a different thumb drive. Go through the process of loading it up with Rufus and all that good stuff, and once again make sure real-time protect is temporarily turned off, and then go through the process of installation again. And generally that will make things happy. So that's really the big stopping points I've hit, and kind of the troubleshooting I go through with these kinds of things. Anyhow, we can click on restart now and then click on done, and then we can pull the thumb drive, and then if all goes well, it should hopefully start booting for us, which in this case it is. It's got the little countdown, and we'll just let that go, and then we should hopefully be met with our login name here. So let's click on that and let's type in our password and hit enter. And then once it logs in, we'll be met with a little tour guide. If you want, you can feel free to take the tour or you can skip it. I'm going to skip it for this video. So at this point, the operating system is installed. If you want to keep watching, I'm going to be going over a general overview of the operating system. Nothing extremely in-depth, but at least kind of showing where general configurations and what the apps are and what have you on here. So I'm going to continue on. Let's start in the top right-hand corner. So in the top right-hand corner, we will click on this. So this is going to give like power options, volume options, network options, stuff like that. So I'll go through each little thing just to kind of highlight what they do. So all the way to the right is going to be your power button. If you do click this, it will give you the option to suspend, restart, power off, and log out. And then if we just click out of that, then it will bring us back. There's the lock screen, so this will make it so that if you have any applications open, but you just want to lock the computer for security reasons, you can click lock. It'll bring you back to the login screen, but all your apps will still be running in the background. So when you log in, they will be still running and available for you. To the left of that is going to be the gear, which is your settings. And we'll go over this more in detail in a little bit, as this is kind of a whole other topic to kind of discuss. But anyhow, back to the top right, the next one is going to be this little camera icon with some arrows there, and this is basically like screen capture. So this will allow you can select an area that you want. You could also select the whole screen. You can select a window if you had an application open, and then by default it sets it as screenshot, but you can also record the screen depending on the different selections that you make here. So it's pretty snazzy. So I'll close out of that. So back in the top right hand corner, so below all those buttons that I just showed is going to be your volume slider for changing how low or high the volume is. If you have an Ethernet port on your machine, then you're going to have a wired option, and this is going to allow it so that you can disconnect if you're connected. It also brings you to the wired settings, which I'll go into more detail later in that whole settings area. If you have wireless, you'll have a Wi-Fi option. So this, if you click on it, is going to allow you to connect up to wireless connections in your area. This is going to be partially blocked out for the privacy of my neighbors, but anyhow, that's kind of the gist of Wi-Fi stuff. And then to the left is going to be power mode. So if you click on this, this is going to give you your power management kind of features. So you've got performance, you've got balance, and you've got power saver, and then you also have the power settings, which brings you into more fine-tuned settings that you can change. Anyhow, my rule of thumb is that I generally just always leave it on balanced. That seems to be the best bang for the buck. But if you really want to make sure you're getting the most performance at all times, you could choose performance mode. It's going to use up more power, all that good stuff. And then if you're really trying to conserve power, you can select power saver mode. Next up is going to be the night light option. So this is going to make it so that it's going to lower the blue spectrum that you're viewing. There's also the light or dark styles. So if you select dark, it gets darker. And then if you uncheck that, then it's technically the light style. I'm just going to leave this as the dark style. And if you have Bluetooth, I believe a Bluetooth option will show up here so that you can connect up Bluetooth devices, and it will kind of give you Bluetooth settings as well. So that's the top right option. So up in the middle is going to be your date and time. So this is going to give you your calendar options. If you added any events, that would show up here. You can add world clocks. You can select a weather location if you wanted to. On the left-hand side is the notifications area. So if there were any notifications of system updates or something like that, then they would show up in here. There is a do not disturb option, and then if you had a bunch of notifications, you can click clear and that will clear the notifications for you. And then the top left is going to make it so it kind of zooms out, and this gives you a few options. For one, you actually can choose between multiple desktops. So if you have this desktop with some apps open, or you've got some files or something hanging out on the desktop, then this would be like desktop 1, and then you have desktop 2. So you can switch between them. Like I said, apps and files and whatnot will change up depending on what you've set for these. There's also the option to do a search at the top if you wanted to. For instance, if you wanted to get to terminal, then you can type in terminal and it will bring it up for you. Go back and click on the top left again. And then in the bottom tray, starting at the furthest left-hand side, we've got web. And then you can click on yes for the default browser for now. You can always add something else if you wanted to. Now, web is basically a browser just for the GNOME desktop experience. If you wanted Firefox or Chromium, you could add those on, or if you wanted the Brave browser or whatever browser you wanted, you could always add it into here. But by default, web is the basic browser that comes bundled with this. So use it, or like I said, feel free to install something else. To the right of web is going to be Geary. This is basically going to be your email mailbox. So you can add like a Gmail account or something of that sort into here so that you can check your email through here. So that's all pretty self-explanatory. And then to the right of that is going to be your calendar, which is just a beefier version of the calendar that I showed off in the middle top section. You can close out of that. And then to the right of that is going to be music. So this is just your general use music player of sorts. And if you had music, it would show up in here. And then to the right of that is going to be your files and the filing cabinet. So then home is basically everything that is under your user profile. And then there's recent, starred, like favorited. There's network. So if there's any shared devices on the network, you might see them here. You can also do a search for any network devices. There's trash, and if there's anything in the trash, then you can empty it. There's documents, there's music, there's pictures, there's videos, and there's downloads. One thing also you'll note is that if I hover over this, it actually shows the full path of where this directory is located. So we'll close out of that. And then next up on the right is going to be the Show Apps option. So this is going to show you all the apps that are currently on the machine. So you can feel free to take a peek in here. And one thing just to note is that Firefox is actually on here along with just the web. So if you didn't want web on here, then you could always just use Firefox. For instance, you can actually grab this and you can add it down here if you really wanted to. And then if you right click on web, then you could unpin it. So that's just an option that I just want to show off, but you could move stuff around in the system tray down here. And then you'll also have these kind of filters of sorts where you've got utilities kind of bundled into one area, and system is all bundled into one little area that you can choose. So I had mentioned that there's the settings option, so let's dive into that a little bit more. So we'll click on the gear for settings. So I'll just go ahead and double click on this so it maximizes it so it's easier to view. So before we dive into the Wi-Fi portion here, I just wanted to show off that there is the little magnifying glass to where you can search for settings in here. But anyhow, so by default, at least clicking in here, it brings us to the very top, which is Wi-Fi. So if you had a Wi-Fi chipset in your machine, then it's going to show up here, and it's going to allow you to turn it on and off. You can connect to hidden networks, you can turn on a Wi-Fi hotspot, and then it's going to show you all the visible networks that you can connect into. Once again, this is going to be partially blocked out for the privacy of my neighbors. Below Wi-Fi is the network. So if you have Ethernet on your machine, it once again will show up here. You can toggle it off, you can set up VPN stuff. There's proxy configurations you can change up if need be. And then below that's going to be Bluetooth. In my case, I don't have a Bluetooth chipset on my machine, so it's saying no Bluetooth is found. However, if you had Bluetooth on here, it would give you the option to turn it on and off. And you could also sync a Bluetooth device and all that good stuff. Below that is going to be displays. So this is where you can change up your screen orientation. So you can change it from landscape to portrait, and then you can do all the fine-tuning portrait left, landscape flipped stuff. Resolutions, you can change up your resolution if you wanted to. So if I wanted to, I could set to 1080, but I'm just going to leave mine as this so it's a little bit easier to see in the video. And then there's the refresh rate. So if you wanted to change up your refresh rate, you have a whole bunch of options to choose. And then there is night light, which again is doing the same exact thing as I showed in the top right corner, where it removes the blue light from the screen. Below that is sound. So it's going to give you a beefier version of the sound options than what was in the top right. You can feel free to change up things in here. Next up is power. So once again, power mode, which I went over previously, is giving you the 3 selections up top. There's also the power saving options. Now, if you've got a desktop, I do want to just mention that you may want to turn automatic suspend off. So this means that the machine's not just going to go to sleep after 15 minutes of being idle if you want to leave it on all the time. Now, of course, it is going to use up more power, but some people with desktops may prefer to have this off. Laptop users are kind of more understanding that their machine is going to try to save some power. And then there's also the power button behavior down here. So, what happens if you click on your power button? What is it going to do? So it's some stuff you can change up. Below that is multitasking. So there's a whole bunch of multitasking configurations that you can set up, especially if you have multiple monitors and how they react. And then below that is appearance. So you're going to have your style up at the top. You can choose accent colors. As you can see, it slightly changes it. And then down below is going to be the option for some pre-canned desktop backgrounds. You can also add a picture if you wanted to. So I'll just check that so that it changes it for us. But of course, you can feel free to do whatever you want. Below appearance is going to be apps. So this is every single app that is installed on the machine currently. So as you can see, there's a whole bunch. And if you click in one of these, then it may give you certain option types. A lot of times it's just notifications, but if you go to something like web, then it may give you a few more different options that you can choose up for permissions. And a lot of times you can also open the apps from within here. You can also do a search for the specific app if you wanted to. So you do have a number of options. Below this is going to be notifications. So this is going to allow you to select do not disturb, as we kind of showed off in the notifications in the top middle portion. Lock screen notifications, and then any apps that are installed that would have notifications you can change up right in here. And then below that is going to be search. So this is going to allow you to do app searching, search locations, and then you can also toggle on or off certain areas that are allowed to be searched or indexed. And then below search is online accounts. So if you wanted to connect to any of these online accounts, then you can do so within here. We'll scroll down, and then next up is sharing. So this gives you an opportunity to change up your machine's name if you wanted to, instead of it being NixOS. And then you can turn file sharing on or off, and media sharing on or off. By default, these both are set to off. And then next up is the well-being settings. So this just gives you a number of settings that you can change up. For instance, screen time limits, daily limit, grayscale, all sorts of stuff you can feel free to take a peek at. And then below that is mouse and touchpad. So if you wanted to alter any of your mouse or touchpad configurations, then it gives you a number of options in here to mess around with. And then below that is keyboard. So if you ended up selecting the wrong keyboard settings during the installation process, you can edit them here. Or if you wanted to change it up after the fact, then this gives you a number of options that you can feel free to change. And then below that is color management. So there's basically color profiles that you can set. And then below color management is printers. So you can add a printer in here if you wanted to. And if you did add any printers, then they would show up in this portion. And then below that is accessibility. So there's a number of accessibility settings that you can feel free to change up, such as seeing, hearing, typing, pointing and clicking, and zoom. And then you can also select the always show accessibility menu if you wanted to. And then below that is privacy and security. So there's a number of configurations you can change in here. Feel free to research if you feel you need any of these turned on or off or configured in any way. And then lastly, below that is system. So in system, you can change up your region and language, your date and time, you can add and remove users, and you can also change passwords within here for those user accounts. There's the secure shell or SSH network access. And then there's the about section. So if you click on the about section, I just want to show that this is another area that you could also change the host name or device name of your machine instead of the generic NixOS. And then it just gives you the generic information of what your machine has and what version of the operating system it is that you're currently running. There is a more fine detailed section in system details that you could click on that will give you a lot more information. So that's it for settings. So last thing I just want to show off is that if you right click on your desktop, then you do have the option to change your background settings. There's the display settings, and then there's just the main settings portion that we were previously in. So basically all three of these will get you into the main settings portion that we were in, but it gives you kind of two fine-tuned areas and then general settings. So that's all you need to do to get NixOS 25.05 running. If you found this video to be useful, please like it and subscribe to my channel to keep up my latest video happenings. I also invite you to check out my channel if you haven't already, as it has many interesting guides and many more to come. Anyhow, until next time, take it easy.